Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone and welcome to episode 284 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Con Whiteley. And today's episode is on what are some psychological treatments for eating disorders. And it is Sunday, the 25th of August 2024 as I record this. So today's podcast episode is to celebrate the release of a brand new book, CBT For Eating Disorders and Body Dysmorphic Disorder, a clinical psychology introduction to cognitive behavioral therapy for eating disorders and body dysmorphia. So I really like this book because it's a CBT based book. It's a lot of fun, and considering that eating disorders are some of the deadliest mental health conditions that we know about, this is really an interesting book. It introduces you to a lot of really good concepts and the wide range of eating disorders, but also what is body dysmorphia. It's a mental health condition that, until I started researching this and until we started talking about it in my lectures last year, we didn't actually talk about it that much, and it's only through this research and my lectures that I even know about body dysmorphia. But it's a critical condition to understand because it is very, very common. So in today's episode, we just introduce you to some of the psychological treatments which are explored in a greater depth in this book. So it's really useful and it's really an engaging episode. So you've got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're going to be reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And the first one is Music versus Misinformation on TikTok. Sharing science in bite-sized chunks can be tricky. Debunking someone's entire argument in about a minute of video is arguably even trickier. But in the face of rampant misinformation on TikTok, that's exactly what many users and science communicators aim to do. With those able to scroll away in an instant if they're not engaged, using every tool and trick available to create a punchy video is therefore important for getting good information out there. Recent research takes a closer look at the role of background music choice plays in the effectiveness on these debunking videos. In a sample of 873 new and aspiring mothers, Mingjong Lee and team find that high-tempo beats can help well-informed debunking clips to better dispel misinformation on COVID vaccines and fertility. Okay, this is a really interesting one, and something that's quite important. So there's two main things I want to say about this one. First of all, I've actually got in my email draft, so this is my personal email, I've got a massive list of different ideas for YouTube Shorts because I'm never going to get loaded into TikTok, because the joke that I say with for my friends is that, I don't want Chinese companies spying on me. Instead, I want American companies spying on me. Because, we all know how data sharing works. So, there's always companies spying on you. And, there's always someone, trying to sell your information to, someone else. So, I'm never going to get involved in, TikTok. But I was thinking of trying to do some YouTube shorts. And, I still want to do it. But it's just, trying to do them, trying to find the time there. And I'm not a natural on video. Sometimes audio is hard enough. So video, I'm even worse at times. And me and video, we don't go together. I do 4 videos a year, one for each Kickstarter that I do. that's enough for me personally, because I'm not a natural and people don't like me on video, I think. No one's ever said that though. So it is actually quite useful to know that if I wanted to be more successful, having some high tempo beats could actually be quite helpful. So I'm definitely going to make a note of that. But on a more serious point, and actually going back to the article itself, it is very important that we do research this area. In fact, this could actually be one of the most important research areas for the 21st century, to some extent, because there is so much disinformation, there's so much misinformation, and I mean, like, some people seem to just dedicate their whole lives to spreading misinformation, hate, and just making up lies. I mean, like, you can't really go on Twitter, and yes, I will always dead name that platform. Yeah, you can't really go on Twitter, and even Facebook's starting to get like that way, and Instagram. I've seen a few things lately, but without bumping into misinformation and lies. So it's bad. We've got to sort this out. This is a definite problem. So I think it's absolutely brilliant that we are finding research to help combat this. Because yes, we can all rely on inoculation theory, but that only goes so far because yes, that's theory, but we've got to apply it into practice. And inoculation theory, as much as I love it, it's not everything because we can't debunk someone's entire argument about a conspiracy theory or misinformation in a 1 minute video. So it's great that we're doing this. This is definitely something that's got to be explored in the future. So the second one is gambling harms may be more prevalent than we thought. According to the Gambling Commission, the value of the gambling market in the UK is a hefty 15.1 billion, with 48% of adults gambling every month. Some of this will be quite harmless, such as buying the odd lottery ticket, yet problem gambling is a growing issue, and according to new figures from the Commission, its prevalence may be much higher than previously thought. Whilst previous studies by the Commission placed the prevalence of problem gambling as low as 0.3%, the results of this survey are much higher, setting it at 2.8%, or up to 1.3 million people in the UK. Certain types of activities were more closely associated with problem gambling: in-person non-sports related events and online slots in particular. So every few months, one of these articles does tend to pop up, and because I don't gamble, because I probably, to be honest, I think I would never really gamble, or I would never do that much. This is always something that's quite difficult for me to talk about because I don't have any experience in it. But I am glad that these are figures. But it's all well and good us having the figures, us having the prevalence rate, which are critical because it does give a sense of urgency, as 1.3 million people are suffering. But it's also not just those people, it's the people around them, it's the families, it's their friends, it's the social relationships, it's the communities that they live in. So there is a very wide-ranging impact that gambling addiction does have. So yes, we've got these prevalence rates. Now we've actually got to apply it to the real world. Someone's got to come up with that. But I would be interested in finding out why the jump, or why this sudden increase. Is it a change in methodology? Is it a thing of, this issue is actually getting worse? And if that is the case, then it implies that what we currently are doing, what we currently are using, is nowhere near enough. Well, enough though. And if that is the case, then what's the next step? Why isn't it working? How do we learn from these, not necessarily mistakes, but this decreased effectiveness, stuff like that? Because this is an issue that we've got to sort out with this such a wide-ranging problem. So the last one is poetic synthesis, a special language for research. Research poetry, or poetic inquiry, has become increasingly important within health psychology. It is used as a tool for data generation, analysis, and presentation of research results using a variety of techniques. Sandra Forkay, who describes herself as an academic social scientist poet, states that poetry may be considered a special language that researchers want to access to further the understanding and impact of their work, as both qualitative research and poetry shares understanding of living and what it's like to be there. By bringing the richness and experience into language, poetry might heighten and emphasize the findings of qualitative research. Additionally, as Brown comments, poetry may help the researcher to gain new perspectives and present findings that may otherwise go unnoticed. Oh, okay, so this is quite a good one now, because it does follow on from last week's Controversy and Taboo in Psychology Research news article. And as I'm actually doing a qualitative research study at the moment, with 2 or 3 more lined up for September, I mean, yeah, that's gonna be insane, because I've actually got to flesh out those ideas. But I really want to do all of them. I don't know how feasible they are, but because I tend to do a lot of qualitative research, it's definitely an interesting idea. Language is something that I'm definitely playing around with a bit more, especially in light of that peer review feedback that I got, last month. So it is interesting. It's definitely something that I think is a good point, because we want our papers to be engaging. We still want them to be academic and professional, but we've got to try and make them interesting so other people who are non-psychologists, non-specialists, and who are policymakers and people who we need to get these in front of to deliver any sort of change that we want to deliver. We need to make them engaging so those people read them, and poetic synthesis might be a good way to do it. Maybe just some food for thought. So I hope you enjoy the psychology news section, so let's move on to the person update. So moving on to the personal update. So this I'm going to keep very short because not a lot has happened this week. Of course, I want to give a massive apology to all of you for the lateness of last week's podcast episode, because it didn't come out till Saturday. It came out 5 days late, and I'm laughing and I'm smiling because that is so bad though. And I mean, yeah, I've been severely depressed this week. I mean, it's probably the worst my mental health has ever been, because I've only ever had proper depression once or twice before, and they've only ever lasted 1 or 2 days. But this has been lasting 9 days now, and yes, I sound better now. This is just because I've got a bit of energy. Before I started recording, I couldn't move. I had a really low mood and all the quite stereotypical depression symptoms. I know when I go back to Canterbury, because I'm going to go back in the house, I'm probably going to just sit there for an hour and just mope and just have a low mood. So yes, my mental health is struggling. Thankfully though, me and my best friend, we're phoning every night, so we're talking and we're laughing. They're making me quite happy, which is really nice, because it does help with the loneliness at the moment. So we tend to talk anywhere between 40 minutes and, to be honest, an hour and a quarter. But one night we did talk for 2.25 hours. And then I'm also going to go up to see them on a Friday, which is why I need to pre-record next week's podcast episode. And then the only other thing that I want to talk to you about is that I'm continuing to work on my academic paper for one of my research studies, which is actually quite fun though. And thankfully I had a breakthrough in the introduction about how I want to structure it, so I'm quite happy about that. So when I go back to Canterbury, hopefully I'm going to have the energy, especially because I've got to prioritize this podcast episode just so this can go out on time. Hopefully I can get that done sooner rather than later. Then the rest of the paper should just flow, which I'm really, really happy about. But academic research, I'm prioritizing it and I am quite enjoying it, especially with the limited energy that I have like most days. So as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always either comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast, and you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi Whiteley, or leave a comment on the Facebook post or LinkedIn post. And today's episode has been sponsored by CBT for Eating Disorders and Body Dysmorphic Disorder, a clinical psychology introduction to the cognitive behavioral therapy for eating disorders and body dysmorphia. So this is a brilliant brand new book that I'm really excited about because I love CBT. I find it really interesting. I find it really quite impactful, and it's just really fun to learn about. So I've already spoken quite a lot about CBT on the podcast before, but this book does dive into a CBT again, but it also adapts it because there are some very specialist forms of CBT for eating disorders, because normal CBT doesn't really work for eating disorders and body dysmorphia, mainly because of engagement rate, which there are massive issues about, and it does need to be structured differently, because you can't treat someone with an eating disorder using CBT until they're back at a healthy weight. So we address that, and we talk about tons of other really fascinating issues and unique aspects that people need to bear in mind when using CBT to treat eating disorders and body dysmorphia. But before all of that, we talk about what are eating disorders, also what are the different types of eating disorders, because there's a lot more than you actually realise at first of all. Though, because when I started learning about eating disorders, I thought it was literally just bulimia and anorexia. But no, there's a lot more, and a lot of them are really interesting. Then that we talk about, which is a very interesting condition, and it's actually body dysmorphia that inspired the front cover of the book. So it's a really engaging, really easy to understand book that I highly recommend. So that's CBT for Eating Disorders and Body Dysmorphic Disorder, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and hardback version from Amazon, local bookstore or local library if you requested, and you can get the audiobook narrated by artificial intelligence from selected audiobook retailers, including Spotify, Kobo, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble, and selected library systems like Biblioteca, Overdrive, and Baker & Taylor. And whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. So a massive thank you to my patrons, because your support shows that you like the show and you want it to continue. So if you want to become a patron of the show and get access to tons of great rewards, now you can at patreon.com/The Psychology World Podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, now you can at buymeacoffee.com/Conor Whiteley. So that's enough for the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about what are psychological treatments for eating disorders. And this is a great episode. This is an extract from the book, so I'm really looking forward to it. So let's dive into it. As we start to turn our attention towards the psychological methods used in treating eating disorders before focusing on cognitive behavioral therapy for the rest of this section of the book, I wanted to quickly mention some pharmacological treatments. Interestingly enough, antidepressants are the most common form of drug treatment for eating disorders, with there being some evidence that this treatment can reduce bulimia symptoms. Bella and Mercer Lee, 2004. Now, as always, I find that interesting about biological methods for psychological conditions is that pharmacological treatments aren't effective in the long term, considering that a person's drive for fitness and extreme dieting isn't biological in nature, it's psychological. Therefore, biological treatments will never be able to help a person come up with more adaptive coping mechanisms for their psychological thoughts and drives. Additionally, pharmacological treatment with anorexia tends to be less effective. Perdue-son and al. 2003. However, it's important to know that antidepressant treatments for eating disorders do have significantly higher relapse and dropout rates than psychological interventions. Again, this comes back to drug treatment failing and being useless at targeting the psychological causes of a condition. As a result, the best outcome for eating disorders are when drug treatments are combined with CBT programs. Family therapy. If we cast our mind back to a few chapters ago, then I mentioned how family factors have a role in how eating disorders are maintained and developed in the first place. For that reason, family therapy can be an effective way to treat eating disorders. Also, this is one of the most common interventions used with eating disorders, with the therapy being based on the idea that eating disorders hide in appalling conflicts within the family. Personally, I do enjoy systemic therapy because the idea of the family as a system is very useful and utterly fascinating. Of course, systemic theory doesn't look at everything and it does miss out on psychological factors, but it's still interesting. And there is no such thing as a perfect theory in clinical psychology. Cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT is the treatment of a choice when it comes to eating disorders, and even more so, Wilson and Sheriff 2005, with this form of a CBT being based on the cognitive model we looked at earlier, developed by Fairbairn and all 1999, since people with bulimia develop negative evaluations about themselves and idealized beliefs about fitness, as well as distorted views of their own body shape. All these areas and beliefs are challenged during a course of a CBT, and there is an enhanced form of CBT that is used as well, and there's a whole chapter dedicated to that form coming up next. CBT is really helpful for a client that are significantly underweight too. What are the stages of CBT for bulimia? We'll see this in more depth in a moment, but the 4 stages of CBT for bulimia, according to Fairbairn 1985, are psychoeducation about the effects of purging, binging, and mood, modified eating habits, small meals 5 to 6 times a day instead of binging to start off with, altering the client's dysfunctional attitudes about food, eating, and the body, teaching the client coping strategies to avoid binging and purging. When a person with bulimia first starts CBT, the focus will be on meal planning and stimulus control, so instead of snacking and binge eating, the meals can be controlled more, so they eat properly 3 times a day, or whatever the therapist deems appropriate. Furthermore, cognitive restructuring is a core part of CBT, so when it comes to bulimia, this is used to address the client's dysfunctional beliefs about their body shape and weight. Then, the focus shifts to become focused on developing relapse prevention methods, so the eating disorder doesn't return after the therapy ends. Moreover, CBT for eating disorders is based on identifying the dysfunctional thinking processes that cause and maintain the disordered eating, as well as using behavioural exercises to test and modify these maladaptive beliefs. CBT for anorexia nervosa. Whereas CBT for anorexia focuses on different clinical features, because we know from other chapters that anorexia involves severe cognitive distortions. For instance, the client has irrational beliefs about weight gain and food, and they have an inaccurate perception of their body. Therefore, this form of CBT aims to change these faulty thinking patterns, which the therapy assumes is what maintains the anorexic behaviour. Now, what makes this form of CBT so special is that if you think normal CBT is highly structured, then this is even more so. Due to CBT for anorexia is the most effective treatment we have at this point for short-term clients. Although if the client needs psychological help in the long term, then they might benefit more from family therapy or interpersonal psychotherapy. Overall, whilst this was a quick whistle-stop tour of the CBT for eating disorders, our next chapter focuses a lot more on enhanced cognitive behavioural therapy for eating disorders, Fairbairn 2008, and it might be my favourite chapter of the entire book. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. So in the book then, after that chapter, what happened is that we start to focus a lot more on CBT for eating disorders, the different types, and some of the different considerations which you might need to consider in the future once you're qualified and if you ever work in an eating disorder service. So eating disorders, I do have a little experience with them because I know my best friend. I'm surprised in the past 2 weeks they've not asked me, have I been eating? I have. Granted, I skipped dinner last night because I've sort of been snacking yesterday and I was just like, I don't want to gain weight. I don't want to do any of that. But eating disorders, they're really interesting. They are quite tragic and they are really deadly, so it's important that we raise awareness, effective treatments that work, and so on, just so we can save lives and do everything that clinical psychology is rather great at. So if you know someone who enjoyed today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, definitely check out CBT for Eating Disorders and Body Dysmorphic Disorder, a clinical psychology introduction to cognitive behavioural therapy for eating disorders and body dysmorphia. And if you want to support the podcast on an ongoing basis, then please check out patreon.com/psychologyworldpodcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, then now you can at buymeacoffee.com/Con Whiteley. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwhiteley.net. So have a great day and I'll see you next time.